Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, everyone. I'm Ian Gulland. I'm the Chief Executive at Zero Waste Scotland. This is definitely me out of my comfort zone. This is not my usual gig, and that's not so much about the demographic. It's the fact that there's a free bar. We don't. I don't usually get to talk at events where there's a free bar. Yeah, a little bit about, before I'll ask the panel to introduce themselves, I'll try and introduce myself briefly as well. I'm Ian Gulland. Zero Waste Scotland we are Scotland's circular economy experts. Our real job is to try and help all of you certainly change consumption habits in terms of not just fashion, but everything that you're involved in. And that's not just about the individual changing the consumption habits of individuals, it's about the economy of Scotland. So some of the numbers, so Scotland as a nation, we consume over 100 million tonnes of materials, half of which, much of which comes from outside of Scotland. That's 18.4 tonnes per person per year. And in terms of resources, that's a massive number. Scientists would tell you that the more sustainable level of consumption is about 8 tonnes. So unfortunately, people of Scotland are well over double the level of sustainable consumption. So all of the things that we're talking about today, the showcasing today in terms of fashion, is very much about how do we help reduce that impact of consumption. And I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that one of the major impacts of that consumption is climate change. So 80% of our carbon footprint here in Scotland comes from that consumption habit. So if we're serious about ending our contribution to climate change, we need to do something not just about how we recycle, how we reuse, how we repair, but ultimately how do we consume differently to reduce that impact. So our job at Zero Waste Scotland, as I said, is to help that. We run a number of programmes. We support government as well in terms of ministers, but much of what we're involved in is supporting not just individuals, but businesses and organisations to become more sustainable, whether that's entrepreneurs, whether that's existing businesses, or whether that's public and third sector organisations as well. So we provide support. We also provide investment as well. So, and when it comes to textiles, so we're running a specific fund at the moment to invest in organisations to become more sustainable in the fashion and textile industry. So I'm very eager to hear from the panel where I should be putting my money. That's one of the questions. I'm not going to ask that up front, but maybe if you've got ideas, you might be able to feed that in. And I'm also interested from you as well. So the rules of the game, I'm going to ask the panel to briefly introduce themselves, who they are, where they're from, and more importantly, what they're bringing to the party. And then we're going to have a bit of a discussion, and that's the aim, is a discussion. And also, if you want to ask each other questions, don't feel that it all has to come through me. So that's my rules of the panel. And then I'm going to open it up for questions from yourself as well, or insights or points that you'd like to raise as well. So there'll be a bit of interaction as well. So anyway, I am now going to turn to Robbie. Is Robbie first? Yes. On you go, Robbie.
Hi, yeah, I suppose I was asked to introduce myself a little bit. I'm going to stand up if that's okay. So it feels a bit weird to have your picture of yourself that you can't look at. Yeah, this is me in my normal attire. So I was told by our marketing manager, do not wear a suit, Robbie. Try and wear something cool. So hopefully I've got close to cool, yeah. Although I feel not probably quite as bright as maybe I could have been. Could have been matching my slide there, Stephanie. So who am I? I work for Ecosurety, and we help companies take responsibility for the products that they make. Predominantly that's packaging companies, companies making consumer electronics and batteries. We don't actually do anything with any textiles companies at all. So when Ian asked me, why did you sponsor this event? I was sort of a bit like, because it's a really big problem. And even though we don't have any customers who are sort of directly working with us on it, it's a massive issue. So when we came and put this problem to Hubbub about a year ago, I can't believe what it actually has ended up looking like from a small idea of just, we really need to promote more sustainable fashion to this. So I'm the Innovation and Policy Director. I'm probably one of the bigger nerds on the panel. So I try work with government to improve policy, and we definitely need some better policy around fashion. I'm an advocate for those companies and producers being responsible. I help to advise the government on packaging at the moment, but maybe in the future I could be telling them what to do on textiles. So if you've got any great ideas, let me know. And finally, as you can see, I'm a fashion industry novice. So I don't really know how the industry works particularly. But yeah, I'm really keen to see some greater policy focus on having a more sustainable industry. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Robbie. So now Stephanie.
Am I standing?
You can stand or sit. It is completely individual.
I might sit and keep it casual. Hi everyone. I'm Stephanie Campbell. I'm Senior Creative Partner at Hubbub. Hubbub is an environmental charity that designs creative campaigns to inspire ways of living that is good for the environment. And one of our key areas of focus is fashion. And we look at, in particular, ways in which we can address overconsumption with clothing. So, the amount of clothing that people are buying and how that's worn. And also looking at ways in which we can extend the life of the clothes that we already own. So a key example of one of the things that we do is this event, Slow Threads. So, it's really great to see all of you here and enjoying the day, and also hopefully see some of you tomorrow as well. So yes, that's my role here today to talk about that.
All right. Thank you.
Handing over.
Thank you, Stephanie. So over to Natascha.
Hi.
Over to you.
Thank you. My name's Natascha, and I am a professor in marketing and sustainable business at Glasgow Caledonian University at our London campus. And I have a few different areas of activity. So as an academic, I'm involved in research around sort of consumer behavior and also sort of industry change in the fashion industry. I'm also involved a little bit in policy. So this week, I worked with the United Nations Global Compact to look at how the UK is measuring up against our SDG commitments, and I was looking at SDG 12, so that's very relevant for today's discussion because it's around sustainable production and consumption. And I also work with a lot of lovely students and a lot of nice young people who are increasingly impassioned around this area, so it's really delightful to see, and hopefully we'll hear from some of the audience who fit in that category.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, we do look forward to hearing from the audience. Yes, Andrew.
Hi, good evening everyone. I'm Andy Ruff. I'm the Chief Executive of Advanced Clothing Solutions. Advanced Clothing Solutions started 25 years ago, half a mile that way in Salt Market, and we started renting out kilts. We're now Europe's largest circular fashion hub. What I mean by that is we basically process over 6 million clothing items a year, and we offer clothing circular solutions to fashion brands and retailers. That encompasses rental and resale. We not only do kilts now, so we do everything from sporrans to baby wear items, to women's wear items, to handbags, to footwear. So we're really trying to expand, and like everyone here, we all enjoy fashion, but we want people to enjoy fashion differently. We want people to enjoy it in a circular way, so we're decreasing the impact that it has on the environment.
Good, thank you. So, Aniela.
That's right.
Your turn.
So my name is Aniela. I'm a founder of this community couture project and one of the facilitators. So what we do, we make garments. So we make very few pieces that are made to carry stories. So everything starts with bringing people together. They donate stories, give us images or elements that have a meaning. For example, that jacket here over there, and you can see it at Lone Hood over there as well, that's 37 different stories donated by the community in response to the question of how does the world look for you, or feels to you right now. And so that jacket has 37 different stories, and it took 600 hours to make it, and it's available to rent. So the idea is that we collect those stories, then craft them into those very intricate pieces, and then make them available for people to share and wear. So what I've got now has probably about 200 different stories in it. And we run workshops where people can come learn about what others created. So those elements, that one in particular is in response to the question of what matters. And we collected, first phase of the workshop was collecting responses of many people, in fact, almost 1,500 people of what matters to them. And they were cutting all those symbols and giving us like a sentence of a few words of what those symbols represent. And now during the workshops that you can, by the way, join tomorrow, you can learn about what those symbols matter, get beads, learn some crafting skills, and help us make those garments happen in this couture way. And again, that will be available to rent for Loanhood. So that's how it works.
Well done, brilliant. And a bit of plugging as well for tomorrow, great. Okay, Ruth, over to you.
Hi everyone, my name's Ruth MacGlip and I'm the Communications Manager at Fashion Revolution. Fashion Revolution is a global movement campaigning for a fashion industry that values people and the planet over profit and limitless growth. The reason this slide is behind me is we have recently launched a campaign alongside lots of other NGO partners and trade unions called Good Clothes, Fair Pay. We're demanding living wage legislation across the EU, and this would apply to any brands selling in the EU, which is every major brand, across their global supply chain, ensuring that living wages are paid. So this could be really transformative for millions of garment workers who currently aren't earning enough to meet their basic needs. So please do scan that QR code. I'm hoping it works from that distance. We need signatures. We need 1 million signatures to get the EU Commission to listen to us. So really passionate about promoting this right now. And also, I used to be part of Fashion Revolution Scotland, which is the country team up here. Please do check out their stall and get involved. They're always looking for volunteers, people to get involved in events, and all sorts of skills are welcome. It's really, it's very much like a people-led movement. And if you're interested in sustainable fashion, do check out our website, fashionrevolution.org as well.
Yay, well done, great. Okay, so I'm going to start, and let me just kind of open it up, because one of the questions I get asked, well, our organisation gets asked a lot, is how do we get people engaged in this? You know, the idea of sustainable fashion, and I guess when you come to this event, you look around and you say, look, all these people are engaged. This is wonderful. This is great. Look at all this. Everybody's got smiles on their faces. This is good fun. This is something that people want to get involved in. You know, being part of, you know, sustainable fashion. So, kind of, what's the problem? Stephanie, you're a communicator. Why is it so hard?
Why is it so hard? Well, it really shouldn't be this hard. I would say that for Hubbub, part of our vision is a world where everyone is an environmentalist, whether they realise it or not. So it's about understanding that there's lots of different kind of changes or behaviours or ways that you can become more sustainable with your fashion without it being a big, massive ask of people. I think there's simple things such as just making the conversation more accessible to people, helping them to understand that they could do simple changes like washing their clothing on a lower temperature at home, or repairing the clothes that they have at home, or looking at ways in which they can have access to second-hand clothing or rental options as well. It's about really taking the time to meet people where they're at, putting on events such as this, or workshops where people can learn how to repair clothing, or highlighting what's on people's doorsteps really is a good step in trying to engage people and helping them understand that it doesn't have to be such a huge problem. There's little simple things that you can do to make a big impact.
Yeah, okay, so Andrew, hire clothing. Because again, Scots people hire, well, Scots men hire kilts all the time. I mean, it's something we do. So how hard is it to try and get other products in the hire business? You know, well, surely it's a growth industry. Everybody now, you know, it should be more of a growth industry in Scotland because we're so used to hiring things.
Yeah, it's not as difficult now because there's definitely a mindset change. I suppose clothing is following lots of different other consumer goods that people follow. We all used to follow, well, though I say all, I'm over 50, so I used to buy vinyl records, but a lot of people here just basically stream music, so you never own that music. And that's the way that fashion is moving. The UK is behind other parts of the world where they don't see clothing items as something that they should possess for the rest of their life. It's something that they own for a piece and then pass it on to someone else. What we've seen at ACS is there's been a big movement in resale recently, which is basically pre-loved garments. But that, in some ways, is just exactly the same as rental. We've got to move that mindset away that rental is just for an occasional rental piece, that people should be able to get items of clothing and have them for as long as they want and then return them and pass them on to the next user. It's exactly the same as a hire car. You maybe rent a car for, sorry, I should say an electric rental car, and rent it for a weekend, or you maybe have it for 2 weeks. And just think about that. We work with some partners where you can have a clothing subscription service, and basically you pay a monthly direct debit, you build a virtual wardrobe of clothing items, and then those clothing items are sent to you. You get 2 items at a time, and then basically you wear them for as long as you want. And then you can return one, you get another piece sent to you. So that is really changing the way that people access clothing. It also means for times were quite hard with inflationary increases that people can get access to clothing they wouldn't necessarily be able to buy. So I'm of an age where I can remember my parents renting a TV. So we are potentially going back to those days, and why should fashion be anything different to that? So we've got, to answer your question, it shouldn't be that hard. It should be relatively straightforward, but we have got to convince retail brands and retailers that it's more profitable than the traditional model that they've followed of buying and selling items. But we all in this room can really influence that.
So, okay, so thinking about that, so I hate to use the word barriers, but then, think of Natascha and your work. Is there specific things that we need to overcome to make that approach much more mainstream? Or is it still quite niche, and it will always be niche? Or is there something more fundamental within the system we need to change?
I think overall it is a systemic situation, and people are forced into making unsustainable choices because we're in a sort of low-wage economy, and we've allowed businesses to build up these huge empires where the only way that they can function is to pile them high and sell them cheap. And so there's enormous pressure from a business side, and I don't really consider that to be fashion. It's just people in business to make money, and the quality of that clothing is horrible, and the conditions people are making it under. So there is all of that, which is very negative. But I think what's been really interesting in the last 5 to 10 years is a lot more people have become more interested in where their clothes come from, who's made them, what they're made of. And so I think there's a lot more open-mindedness towards all sorts of different, and I was thinking that today because today I've had an interesting day where I've had people laughing at me in the street, and I've had people coming up and saying, oh, you look lovely. And I thought, it's really, I'm sort of the same, but people have got different ideas about clothes and clothing. We're different people. So I love charity shop clothing. That suits me. I love buying second-hand things. I don't mind if it's broken, something's bust off it, I'll mend it. I don't mind if it doesn't quite go, I'll just pretend it does. But not everybody thinks like that. So I think we have to have solutions for people all across the board. One of the big barriers, I think, and you're doing a lot to solve that, is people often think that something that's second-hand or used might be dirty. So that's a really, really massive thing. And then I think another barrier towards purchasing is price, and lots of consumers, and I think that's a worry at the moment with the cost of living crisis, is that people will start to, whether it's a reality or not, they'll start to think, well, I can't afford to make a sustainable choice. So that's difficult.
There's loads of questions there I could keep asking, but I'll try and share them out. So I guess you've tapped in, Kate, in the awareness of people. I mean, that's what you're really tapping into. People are much more aware, or asking questions about where their clothes are coming from, how are they being made, what's the story before it actually gets to the kind of retailer and stuff like that. So I wonder whether, is that, there was 1 million people you're looking for to sign up, so, that's a huge number. But I guess you are tapping into it. You're seeing a growth in that awareness. So speak a little bit more about that growth that you're seeing and how you're responding to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Fashion Revolution is actually about to approach its 10th anniversary. It was formed in the wake of the Rana Plaza factory collapse, which was the largest industrial disaster in the fashion industry. And it sparked a question of who made my clothes. And that question has sparked the world's largest fashion activism movement. And we can't underplay how powerful that is. However, we still haven't got the fundamentals right. Millions of garment workers aren't being paid a living wage, most of them young women. And we're making too much stuff, you know? It's you know, there's a lot of problems in the fashion industry. It's a very complex global supply chain that touches agriculture, technology, art, you know, everything. But for me, the two fundamental problems are there's too much clothing, you know, we need to slow down, and we need living wages, because these issues are intrinsically linked. As you were saying, Natascha, the industry relies on selling fast, selling cheap, and selling a lot. Therefore, you know, they need to keep those wages low, and it, you know, keeps that cycle going. So what we try and do as Fashion Revolution is, instead of just focusing on the aspect of what we buy as individuals and as consumers, as we've been taught that we are, we're citizens. We actually have a lot more power than just what we have a lot more power than just what we buy or don't buy. And I think for most of us right now, as you say, in the cost of living crisis, feel like actually, you know, that's not my biggest priority right now, is buying the most sustainable garment. So what we're trying to encourage people to do is both to influence brands and to influence policy. So like the Good Clothes Fair Pay example is a really good example of, you know, direct democratic action. We encourage people to write to their MPs, we provide those tools, and we encourage them to ask brands directly, you know, I'm your customer, I want to know transparent information about your supply chain. So I think there is awareness rising a lot, and you know, lots of brands have jumped on that, but we're still kind of following the same system of buying as much sustainable fashion as you possibly can. And our point is, you're so much more than just a consumer. You're an activist, you're a citizen. And I think that's empowering when people start to realize that too.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Aniela, as a designer, I guess the obvious question is, what is the role of the designer in that? Because people have said, because you can design, you know, a designer can design something really beautiful and whatnot, and then it goes off and somebody makes it in another part of the world to some extent, and, you know, has other issues in terms of labour and all that. So I guess how can you, I mean, obviously what you're doing here sort of summarises the role you can have, but how do you, when you start to take things to scale, how can the designer really influence what's been worn, or how it's been worn and how it's been made?
Yeah, of course. So I think, first of all, design to me, it's very much about communicating as well. So we have this amazing ability to create the culture, the form culture, and to kind of bring things together. And I think when I think about fashion, I think I would like to see my role as a designer in fashion to be actually broader understanding of what fashion is, because fashion isn't only shopping. And fashion can be also about participation, about community, about coming together, making things together. And if you look into folk fashion practices, or people were coming together and co-designing things and making things happen collectively. So for me, as a fashion designer, it's really important to look into those different values in fashion and different things that fashion does, because fashion can also mean exactly coming together, sharing something. Fashion is really what we have in common in many ways. It is about designing commonality, and then trends kind of rely on it. But fashion by itself, it can be about commoning, right? And I really kind of agree with what all of you were saying, that what you were tapping into, that we have so many products that as a designer, it's really important for me to look into what actually we need from fashion at this point. And I would like to see this dynamic flip. So we have, at the moment, we've got lots of products that are meaningless or like that lose meaning very quickly. And when I work with community couture with other different people, with many different people, it's about creating like 5 pieces that have like thousands of meanings, and that many people can relate to differently and brand and have an access to without owning them. And so looking into like, for me, design is just a way to kind of subvert things and show people different ways of thinking and invite them into the creative process. Because I think in fashion or in broad design, we've got this issue of having a head designer that controls everything and kind of defines the outcome. And this is completely unnecessary, in my opinion, because once you trust that people can come into the journey and they also care about making something beautiful, then magic can happen. And I'm just trying to illustrate it.
And it's also a myth, right? The myth of the designer
Completely.
hides thousands of pairs of hands involved in that supply chain. So we see the name on the label and we think they've stitched it themselves. No, you know, none of those garment workers get credit for that. So that's why I love what you're doing anyway.
Well, absolutely. So I'm trying to, through this and through inviting all of you into making and creating those pieces with us, like in a couture workshop, but with many hands that are coming to it, I'm just making painfully obvious the fact that every fashion garment that you have was made by hundreds of people, but that one is just looking like that. Yeah, so I guess that.
Yeah, because sometimes there's a kind of, what's the word, you know, it's very similar to food preparation in restaurants sometimes. I always think, you know, you go to restaurants, like, there's a big thing about opening up the kitchen. So when you go to a restaurant, they tell you where your food came from, and then you watch the chef cook it, and, you know, and there's much more transparency about it. You know, there's the big thing about that. You know, clothing's, to some extent, that's what you're talking about, isn't it? You're kind of seeing the designer, seeing the dish, you know, seeing the product, and then seeing people do it. Because at the moment, it's, as you say, Ruth, it's kind of hidden away. You don't see the manufacturer. And now you're asking that question. So what is actually going into it? So I mean, one of the things, obviously, you know, is ever I do, you know, I've done chairing panels before, and you get to a point where everybody's agreeing with each other, and that's great to see. And obviously, we've got people from all parts of the, you know, of the industry up on stage. But it is that. So collaboration must be key to this. How does all of those parts start to work together? And I guess I'm turning to you, Robbie, because in some of your experiences, particularly around packaging and all of that, and I know that as well, you know, some of the biggest challenges is getting that collaboration working. But here's the textile industry, all kind of agreement that it needs to change, you know, the numbers, you know, the history of unsustainability, both in terms of the environment and obviously, you know, the social aspect of it all. So is there things that you think you could learn from the textile industry, or rather from other parts of your business, that could help shape and, you know, really accelerate some of the changes that are required?
Yeah, I think the collaboration that's required is a lot more complex, and that comes to your comments about it's a big, complicated system change that's required, because lots of the reason that we have mountains of textile, and you know, my background is recycling and waste, is effectively because the full life costs are not being costed into the garment, and that comes to not paying a living wage. And I think there is, it's not something that I can look at purely through an environmental lens. And many of the other issues that we've tackled as a company have been through an environmental lens. How do you make reuse and the waste hierarchy of, you know, refuse and repair and reuse and the last resort recycle? It's sort of, that is not the thing that needs to be applied to the fashion industry and textiles, because if we start to create systems and get collaborations going to just recycle stuff, we're probably not addressing the heart of the problem. We're sort of cleaning up the mess left afterwards. And so I think when it comes to collaboration between actors involved in the supply chain, it's about what parts of business and operations in the UK do we promote. And at the moment, we promote selling things at a low cost very cheaply. We make it very easy for organizations to do that. We don't make it very easy for the average tailor to repair clothes. They don't have the same incentives or level playing field as those who are making the clothes really cheaply. So there's simple things, as they've done in Sweden, where they just don't have VAT charged on repairs of things. So you could just say, tailors, don't pay VAT, and instantly it makes it 20% more viable to be doing those activities to keep things in circulation. So I agree that yes, we're interested to try and get the stakeholders together and see what progress could be made, but it's not a waste problem at all. And if we start looking at it just through the lens of mountains of waste, we've totally missed the point that we have organizations, and I mentioned it earlier, like Patagonia, who are lauded, green, and they're leaving their profits to the earth and all the rest of it, but still on their website in 2020, only 39% of the people who put their garments together were paid a living wage. And so, and that's like lauded as the best one. 39% is not even half of the workers. So the problem is not waste, and that's why I'm sort of sat here slightly uncomfortably and worming in my chair, because I don't have good solutions other than that VAT exemption I gave you for how you address it, because it is a big and very different problem to ones that I've tackled in the past.
Can I add to that? We at Advanced Clothing Solutions, we've spoken to United Nations, Scottish Government and the UK Government about removing VAT on clothing rental. Because immediately you're reducing the cost of it by 20%. We've had various discussions, and we've got a paper in at the moment to hopefully get that put in place. Obviously you don't pay any VAT on children's clothing, so why should you do it on rented clothing? Immediately it's making it more attractive. So we do need support from government. There's so many initiatives out there, but we need, as individuals, to challenge government. We are an SME. There's only so much we can do as an industry player. But it's quite exciting that the governments are listening to us now. They wouldn't have embraced that. It'll be interesting to see whether all the tax cuts will generate a reduction in VAT.
Let's not get into politics. So maybe just opening that up then. So I'm not suggesting that is the silver bullet, but obviously that is something that clearly could help. Is there other things that would really help that I was going to, obviously government, thinking about government or policy, not specifically the environmental field, but perhaps in other areas that could really open this up?
I would say the number one thing that brands need to do voluntarily, but also policy needs to push them to do, is be transparent about their supply chain. The stat you just gave about Patagonia, they've disclosed the fact that 39% are paid a living wage. That is only in the first tier of their supply chain, which is where garments are cut and sewn together. Below that, as anyone who's ever worked in the fashion industry knows, there are many other tiers of suppliers, outsourcing, subcontracting, all the way back to the fiber itself. And our research, the Fashion Transparency Index, which looks at the 250 largest fashion brands in the world, so every major high street brand basically and luxury, 48% of them disclose no information about their suppliers at all, not even beyond made in Bangladesh. There's no factory list, nothing, let alone the information about being paid a living wage. So we really believe that transparency is it's the bare minimum that needs to be reached. We need, mandatory disclosure from EU level, from the UK level, international legislation working together for this, but we as consumers, not as consumers, as citizens, also have this power to demand that transparency, because it really is the enabler of change.
Yeah, so I'm not being naive, but I always sometimes in my job think, is there other things that we could replicate, or other systems or approaches, and the one that always comes to mind when we talk about that transparency is fair trade coffee, right? Now, I'm not being naive to say, it's 100% perfect, but it is a well-recognized accreditation system in terms of transparency. In fact, I think I'm right, and all of the main supermarkets do not stock anything other than fair trade coffee, and they don't even promote it anymore. It's a kind of given, and that was driven by consumers, absolutely making that choice.
I think coffee is a good place for fashion to learn from. Obviously, there's a lot of exploitation in the coffee sector, but I went to some hipster £5 latte place the other day, and you scan the QR code on the cup, and it mapped the entire supply chain of that coffee, including packaging, everything, showed you the farmer, like took you through his life, everything. And I was like, wouldn't it be amazing if clothing had that too? But the brands haven't even made that first step of tracing it themselves, let alone communicating it to consumers.
Yeah, okay. I'm kind of signal about opening up to the audience, but one more question before I do. Just maybe it just comes back to that point I raised at the beginning about I'm an investor. Is there areas that you think, particularly here in Scotland, obviously, because my money has to be spent in Scotland, is there particular areas, I'm not suggesting the individual companies I should invest in, but the areas of business that we should be focused on if we really want to make a difference in the next couple of years, looking at Natascha?
I would say the number one thing is to invest in female-founded companies, because we know that women get a very tiny percentage of any funding. So if that was your first criteria, I think I'd go for that.
Okay, good answer. All right. That's fine. Okay. If there's anything else, but I'll open it up now, and you can have a thought and think about that. So yeah, this is your opportunity. I believe there is a roving mic. So if you could just let Sarah give her a little bit of time to get to you, that would be fair play. I'm looking around. Sorry, you need to put your hand up. Just shout at Sarah. I'm over here. If you say your name, that helps them just get a bit of time.
Sure, my name is Lydia. Thank you so much for this conversation. I have two questions. One's for Andrew, one's for Natascha. Andrew, why aren't we seeing stores that we can walk in just like charity shops, but they're all rental? And then for Natascha, you follow fashion movements and how people are consuming differently. Could you share your thoughts on digital fashion? Thanks.
Sure. I think by digital fashion, do you mean sort of virtual fashion? Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Digital fashion, I think, is really appealing to people who like digital things. And when it first started existing, I don't think anyone thought of it as a sustainable solution. And then I think people suddenly went, oh, we're very sustainable because we're not making anything, but not really thinking about actually all the sort of carbon impact of doing things digitally. So I think there are uses. So I think lots of things like prototyping can be really useful to do that in a digital space. But I don't think we should just think that because something is created, in the digital world, that it isn't having impact. And also, I'm not sure that there's evidence yet that it stops people consuming physical garments as well. It might just be a different kind of consumption. So I think it's a really interesting field, but I think because sustainable fashion has become a bit of a trend, and everyone sort of feels like, well, we have to talk about that. I think in a sense, I've seen a few people talking about digital fashion as being a sustainable solution without thinking of any of the externalities. And that's why fashion's really complicated, because there's a lot of externalities at every different stage. And I think also that's why it's a challenge for us. And I am naive, but it would be lovely just to go and buy clothes and not have to have a sort of degree in biochemistry and human rights law and all of these things that you could just, and that's, where, again, the government and industry bodies have a role to play, because they should be forcing people to only sell things, where there was a presentation that Boohoo gave at I don't even know why they're allowed in the room, but anyway, and they talked about this marvelous thing they were doing, which was making sure that their workers paid their tax. And you're like, that's sort of the law. Like, that's a sort of minimum thing. So I think, it's a dangerous space to just assume something's sustainable because people say it is, but it's interesting to think about. Thank you.
Andrew.
Sorry, can I ask you to repeat the question? My wife, Sarah, is always complaining I'm going deaf, and I think she's probably...
No problem. So we have loads of charity shops. I mean, in Shawlands, there's like 5 in the span of like 20 yards. But we don't have the rental ones. Like, why can't we see brick-and-mortar rental fashion stores?
Yeah, it's a good question, because... Yeah, it's a good question. What we're seeing is the biggest growth area is rental platforms, so not bricks and mortar, probably because a lot of the organizations that are embracing rental are sort of trying to disrupt a market, and they're doing it from basically starting up from fresh. So bricks and mortar traditionally is more expensive than building a rental platform. So what we do at ACS is support that by facilitating the back end for the rental platform. But in the US, there is definitely bricks and mortar rental stores. We used to have a facility in Memphis where we used to supply tuxedos all over the US. And some of our customers there were rental stores that were purely renting out men's tuxes. You weren't able to buy anything in the store, it was purely rental. Rent the Runway had rental stores as well in the US. It's a matter of time before it comes to the UK. And I'd also say that from what I saw in the US, that resale is embraced by brands in the US than more than in the UK. I was in the States last week, and we were getting told about a brand that had 2 shops in LA. One was selling brand new items. The shop next to it was selling previous loved items, and more volume was being achieved in the previous loved store. So I think that's a really, really exciting thing, and we should all be quite excited about that, because that's a sign that
Well, it is a sign.
not consumers, but users, because we're not consuming clothes, we're using clothes, are embracing that method.
Brilliant. Excellent. More questions? Oh, over here. You need to jog round, Kate.
I'm jogging.
Hi, thanks to all the panel. It's been a really interesting discussion. My name's Josepha. I run Graceful Changes, which is a children's clothes rental service. I partner with ACS, and I've worked with Zero Waste Scotland, so I'm kind of a fan. So I think in the event today and on the panel, there's been so much discussion about what consumers can do, what businesses can do, what citizens can do, and we've slightly alluded to what government can do. And that kind of, I'm like, what do we want government to do? Why are they not doing anything? I think it's great, say Scottish Government funds Zero Waste Scotland, but in terms of fashion policy, we've been able to phase out plastic bags, phase out single-use plastics. Like, why is there so much stuff being sold that is basically criminal in terms of exactly what Natascha said about why do you have to know about human rights law and biochemistry to go and buy something? Why is so much being demanded of the consumer? And what should we be demanding of government?
Can I jump in on that?
To anyone on the panel.
Everyone to answer that?
Well,
Ruth?
The legislation landscape has changed massively in the last 5 years. I think it was 2017, a report was put forward to the UK government, Fixing Fashion, with a list of really basic recommendations for the industry, and every single one was rejected. Now the UK is scrambling to keep up with the EU and their textile strategy. UK leaving the EU leaves us out of this really game-changing legislation, which is heartbreaking. Governments have a lot of power in how they regulate corporations, but they don't have the incentive to, because we're in a capitalist system and we've got to make money. So, I do believe that policy is a really powerful tool. It is a slow-moving tool. We need things to come from all angles. But I do think things are starting to change. We're seeing game-changing laws in the US, the Garment Worker Act, the Fabric Act, the Fashion Act, and in the EU and elsewhere, and Scandinavia is always well ahead with us. So the tides are changing, but it is going to take continued pressure, particularly when the political landscape is so unstable, and it doesn't seem like a priority, but it really is.
Robbie?
Yeah, I think we mentioned how complicated the problem was, didn't we? And governments, the UK government, I know well, they like to compartmentalise things and say, this is for the Environment Department to deal with. This is for the Business Department to deal with. This is for the Treasury to deal with. And so they just hive up the work and say, you do a policy here on this. Fashion is your problem, not our problem. And the reality is, it doesn't work with the way that we govern ourselves to compartmentalise everything. And this speaks not just for fashion, but the circular economy as a concept in general, for many other materials that flow around the world, is that we're just not, governance-wise, we're not set up to deal with these complicated issues that are cross-departmental, where Treasury needs to do something on a tax or a levy per garment, as was recommended in Fixing Fashion and some of these other measures. And the environment department need to set mandatory standards, and then the business department need to make disclosure standards. So I think that the sort of why aren't we seeing stuff is because it hasn't found a convenient home like packaging did. Oh, it's an environmental blight, so it's got a home. Now, that's not perfect, but at least there is a lot of clamour and legislation. You mentioned the plastic bags. So to answer your question of why, I think it is just because it's big and complicated across these departments, and the government historically is no good at that stuff.
But
sad, but
if
true.
I can just add very quickly something to it. But I think also it's because there is not enough communication that's simple and direct to people who actually can put the pressure, which is us, all of us. Because when we're talking about additional fee on the garment that was recommended by the inquiry, we're talking about 1p per garment. That was recommended. It was recommended increase of 1p per garment to build more recycling facilities in the UK. And that was refused. So that's the level of absurdity we're dealing with. Because no one minds 1p on top of anything. But that would create, but also gives you an idea of what would make a change. Because imagine how many garments are being sold so that 1p would amount building so many recycling facilities. So I think if those facts were more accessible, and I think that's what you guys in Fashion Revolution doing quite a lot, and if people really kind of became a bit more outraged about how ridiculous that is, then we can create the change and then create the pressure that is really needed.
I was going to add. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, unfortunately, sometimes change happens. It doesn't happen from the top down. It comes from the bottom up. And unfortunately, in some cases, it will be a situation where there'll have to be grumblings and a lot of discussion from people on the ground, from citizens, from consumers, from the general public, holding people higher up to account and saying that they're not happy with what the current situation is. I could use the example of the focus on single-use plastics a few years ago, and the fact that that became a huge talking point and issue, and changes had to be enacted because people were so driven to wanting to see a change. I think sometimes there is a space where if you feel passionate enough and you feel that you're not being listened to, that the grumblings have to come from the bottom to affect the change at the top.
Yeah, and I would just, because I was going to say that, so I'm not a spokesperson for the Scottish Government, I obviously work quite closely with them, but yeah, the shift in emphasis because of in plastics was really down to people, citizens, really, going to their MSP. A lot of school children as well got involved in, the need to tackle plastics, and that really got attention. And we've now got certain single-use items now banned in Scotland. We've got a variety of other initiatives coming forward. So it does, and it comes back to the point that you made about even you all as the power that you all have individually and collectively in terms of consumers. You have that as well, in terms of the politicians to influence them. So having a well-rehearsed voice together to make that point, get it across to people, then they are listening. And I know it's complex. I have to watch. This is the bit I always get worried about, because it's usually in many cases at Zero Waste Scotland get asked to work out the complexity and how to get through it once the politicians have decided that they want to see action. So yeah, I think there is that opportunity to really emphasise that you need to see change. But also, the other thing I always say is central government, absolutely, but there's also a role for local government as well. Local government have a relationship with individual shops, individual supply chains as well, even through their own business opportunities, particularly around textiles and uniforms and a whole range of things. So there's that, if it's becoming, if the thought is it's the environmental issue, clearly we're all very aware of that now, but if we want to really make inroads into the moral issue, then I think everybody needs to be, I think we all really understand that that's an important thing that we need to all address. We can't keep just accepting it. We all need to make a stand both at a local level and an international level. We all want to be global citizens after all. Sorry, that was a speech from me. I didn't mean that. So, is that more?
I think that might be our final point.
Could I just?
Of course you can.
Yeah. So I was just, because one of the things I was just going to kind of end with and let them all say it, because you said it about, you know, talking about it, the best thing we can all do. I think you said, was it Stephanie? You said about, you know, the need to talk about it, and it's something we talk about at Zero Waste Scotland. You know, to have a conversation, particularly around reuse, repair. Do you have that conversation with your friends, your family, your colleagues? And it's one of the, because people always say small things never, you know, all the small things we're asked to do don't really make a difference, but they do. You know, they really do make a difference. And my example is, if you walk around with a reusable mug or a cup, you know, it might feel like a small thing, but you're an influencer, because people see you with that cup, and that registers that you're doing something positively, or you're doing something different perhaps than them, but you're doing something more positive for both the environment and for the wider community. So you should never feel that a small thing. But the interesting thing about fashion for me, and this is why I think that today, for me being here, has been so fantastic, seeing the catwalk and all of that, you know, because it's a demonstration of something different and much more sustainable. But sometimes that's hard when you wear clothes, isn't it? You know, people don't know whether it's new, you know. So it's something I think all of us have to do is say, if you're wearing something more sustainable or sustainable, you need to talk about it. You need to mention that. You know, it's kind of when you walk in the room, you know, tell people, oh, do you like my jacket? It's second hand, you know, and be proud of it, and don't feel, and maybe it is a bit ripped, or it's not quite the thing, there's a hole in it, but embrace it, you know.
Stop talking about my outfit.
No, I wasn't, because I was going to ask whether, I was going to put the panel on the spot and say, and at the end of it, I should have done it at the beginning, are you actually wearing anything sustainable? But I'll start with my own, because I'll just tell you, because my jeans are leased, so that's my thing. They're actually from a Dutch company, but I pay a monthly subscription for my jeans, and at the end of the year, I can keep paying the subscription, or I can send them back. I get a new pair, well, not a new pair, you know, recycle them, and they'll take them away. And if they get damaged, like a spill something on it, or I rip them, they'll take them back and they'll repair them and bring them back to me. And this is just another way of wearing. But you don't know they're the leased jeans. Hopefully you think they're a nice pair of jeans, but they're a nice jeans. And obviously I've got a second-hand jacket on. And I think my shirt's second-hand as well. But anyway, do you want to just to finish up, if that's okay, what's your most sustainable piece of clothing that either you're wearing or maybe you just forgot to bring it?
I'm glad you're giving us the get out of jail there, but I don't need it, thankfully. So yeah, I'm maybe not quite in their target demographic, but I do browse Depop. So this is a Finisterre shirt that is second-hand from Depop, about half the RRP is what I paid for it. Same with my Dickies trousers, which are sort of a staple, aren't they? These are second-hand also. So I think, but generally, I'm one of those people, when I speak to my friends, I wear second-hand shoes, of which these Nikes also are. And they would be aghast at that. You know, they would wear shirts, they would, you know, rent jeans and things, but the idea that I wear another man's shoes, or person's shoes, they think is just a step too far. But I suppose everyone has their limits. My socks and underwear are my own.
I feel like they're all not getting a bit nervous. So anybody just jump in and say, this is what I'm wearing second hand, feel free.
My outfit is on loan from Higher Street, and I think I chose well. I've had a lot of compliments today.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Really
Brilliant.
pleased.
Well, that is it. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, trade, charity store, Oxfam Superstore, mother-in-law's mother. Can't remember, but it is second-hand. I think I really like second-hand clothes because they have a history to them, and you can imagine a lovely story about them. So I think that's a really nice, you know, and you can change up. And also I think what's really nice about charity shop shopping, charity shops are fabulous examples of circular economy, and you're also doing some sort of social impact because you're choosing to spend your money in charity shops by definition of supporting different initiatives. So I think you get a double for your dollar there.
Andrew.
It's good to hear High Street, ACS partner with High Street as well. So and obviously mud jeans as well.
Yes, indeed. Name dropping.
I'm not owning, I'm using a jacket and a pair of jeans that I acquired from a second-hand platform.
Amazing.
For me, it's like sustainable. First of all, sustainable in what kind of way, and kind of that's first question. And what sustainable thing am I wearing? What would follow that is everything and nothing, because it really depends what's going to happen to it once I stop wearing it.
Yeah, good point.
and also kind of everything and nothing.
Everything I'm wearing is from a charity shop, apart from the jewellery that's from a local London jeweller. But charity shops are I think 80% of my wardrobe, because it's cheaper, to be honest. But it also has other benefits. So.
No, absolutely. So there you go, fully dressed, sustainably. There you go, well done. I thought I might have caught somebody out, but they're all well trained. Anyway, thank you to the panel, thank you to the organisers, and thank you to all of you. It's been fantastic, great opportunity, great Friday night for me, like I say, and you've been a great crowd, so thank you.